Don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out our new podcast, Our Therapy for Nerds.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Behind the Mini. Today, we are going to take a look at the Howling Commandos.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one.
So, I'll be honest, before we started doing the research, I was kind of meh on the whole topic.
Really?
I've kind of known about them over the years, and I just didn't think too much about it until we started researching it.
I gotta be honest, that surprises me, Andy. It seems like it would be right up your alley, but...
Well, I do enjoy, being a former military person in the Army, I do enjoy military stories, but when you get to comics, they get kind of cheesy, or, I just wasn't sure what to expect, but there is a lot of depth and a lot of heart in the Howling Commando stories, more than I would have given credit for, especially during the time it was made.
That's right, and it did come out, first issue was in 1963. It ran until 1981, so obviously popular.
It was pretty popular, yeah.
Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby.
The very classic duo of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And there's a lot about them in the story that we'll get to, especially when we're talking about Mr. Nick Fury himself.
Yes, absolutely. So even though it came out in 1963, these comics were supposed to take place during World War II. And these were not superheroes, they were just regular guys.
Right. In fact, we didn't start seeing superheroes until about a year into the actual run of the comic.
Yeah, I think it was episode 13, Captain America shows up.
I love it how you call it episode. They're issues in comics, and that's fine.
You know what?
They're episodes.
I'm not a comic book person, so I apologize. I've been reading a lot of comics lately, though.
A lot of episodes?
A lot of episodes.
So why were they called the Howling?
Or, hey, in the Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commando, he would say the next ish.
The next ish.
Like, be here for the next ish. That's an order.
So, and for the record, Nikki read a lot of these comics. She does a lot. She's a researcher.
I do, and I love reading, and I'm a fast reader. So,
and that's it. She is definitely a fast reader. So when she's saying things, it's because she got it from the actual comics.
Yeah, we have Marvel Unlimited, so we've got a lot of stuff we can pull from that.
Right, and so all this came, for the most part, from the comics themselves.
Yeah, we also got some stuff off the internet as well.
Right. So speaking of that, Nikki, why were they called the Howling Commandos?
Okay, well, this is pretty funny, but basically, whenever they were going into battle, one of them would yell, "Wahoo!" WAH-HOO.
And that's
how they got the name.
And that was the Howl, the supposed Howl Command. Now, you had read one point that was kind of also a joke, sort of, that somebody challenged Stan Lee.
I don't know how accurate this is, but one of the things I was reading was that Stan Lee made a bet with, I can't remember, somebody from the comic, that he could do a silly name and still sell comics.
And he was right.
He was right.
So sit back, everyone, and here are a bunch of facts about the Howling Commandos I think you're going to enjoy. So let's get started. So before we actually start looking at the characters, especially the ones on the card, let's talk about the firsts, because this comic had a lot of firsts to it.
It did. One of the firsts was the first comic where someone actually died and stayed dead.
Right. And what's kind of hilarious is when I was growing up in the comics, there were two deaths that were unbreakable, and they were never coming back, and that was Bucky Barnes and Uncle Ben. And both of them have come back in the comics. But from the Howling Commandos, Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos, one of the main characters died in issue 7, I think it was, 6 or 7.
Yes, I believe it was Junior Juniper.
Junior, yeah.
Junior. He was the youngest of the Howling Commandos. He was from an Ivy League school. It was really sad. It was a very sad issue.
So, and basically, they were in the middle of an assault by the Nazi forces. Again, this is supposedly takes place during the real World War II from our Earth, and the emplacement they were at got shot by a tank, and because of the shrapnel and the blast, Junior ended up taking a critical wound and died.
And this was a shock to comic book readers back then. This was not something that ever happened in a comic book. So
Right.
It kind of gave some weight to this comic book. It was kind of like, oh, they're serious.
Yeah, and I think what's important to remember about all that, a lot of people who are newer to comics, and let's say in the last 30 years, 30, 40 years almost, are familiar with more of a grittier, dirtier, semi-realistic version of a comic. But before the 70s, the campy Batman-esque, Adam West version, that's kind of what happened in comics. It was a comic. People, had hilarious misadventures, but no one really ever got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
But this was supposed to be a gritty war story, a war drama.
Yep.
And as in war, your buddies die.
That's right. Another first was this was the first not the first, but one of the first African Americans that took a main role in a comic book.
Right.
And as you know, there was a lot of stuff going on in the U.S. at that time, civil rights movement and things like that. So they did not shy away from that storyline.
Right. And also, he wasn't, it had the first black man, which was actually Gabriel Jones, who we're going to talk a little bit more about that. It had a Jewish member on the team.
Yes, that was Izzy.
And
Izzy Cohen, I believe.
Izzy Cohen, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it had, they didn't shy away from racism at all, in the fact that they acknowledged it existed.
Yeah, there was a lot of cultural diversity on this squad.
Exactly, and that just again was not done. One thing you was telling me that I had not been aware of: Stanley himself was Jewish, and therefore he wanted to make sure that story was not shied away from.
Also, he was in World War II.
He and Jack Kirby were in World War II.
I want to say Jack Kirby might be Jewish as well, but that's neither here nor there. Mm-hmm. But they both kind of brought their experiences from World War II to this comic book.
Right. So, yeah, a lot of major groundbreaking things. I think the last point, you had mentioned to me was issue number 1. What was the kind of the accident with issue 1?
So in issue 1, everybody was on board that Gabriel Jones was an African American, going to be a main person in the comic book. But it was so unusual that the publishers, the people that did the printers, thought it was a mistake and made Gabriel Jones a white guy.
Right, on the cover. So, yeah, that was unintentional from the creator's point of view, and from that point on, they had it corrected. But
yeah, it was corrected immediately. But yeah, pretty crazy.
Pretty crazy stuff. So, groundbreaking work from the Howling Commandos for just a mere comic. So let's get to the actual commandos themselves. Who are the 3 people on the actual card and in the game?
So on the card, we've got Nick Fury Sr., we've got Dum Dum Dugan, and we've got Gabe Jones.
Right. But all in all, there were actually 15 commandos throughout its original group.
Yeah. Some other ones were Dino Manelli. He was a Hollywood star. He left his acting career to join the Army.
And what's interesting, they actually talk about him in the Secret Warriors issue number 19, and the comment was he was kind of a Dean Martin, or Frank Sinatra-esque type character. And the point they made was, even though he was super famous and recognized everywhere, the only thing he was really ever proud of was the fact that he was a Howling Commando.
Yes. There was Izzy Cohen, and he was a mechanic from Brooklyn.
There was Jim Morita, who was Japanese American.
There was Reb Ralston. He was a Southerner from Kentucky. I want to say he ended up being a senator at some point.
Why did he fall to the darkness?
I don't know. He went to the dark
He went
side.
to the... All right, then we got Percival Pinky Pinkerton.
Yep, and he is the one that replaced Junior Juniper.
Right.
He was also British.
Yeah, he had a very unusual look. Well, he did not have the standard look of the rest of the commandos. He was very much dressed as a normal soldier for the British Army would be during World War II.
Right.
So he stood out easily. You could easily tell where he was in a picture.
That is right.
All right, so we talked about Eric. We had Jonathan Jr. Juniper. Again, he died. We had Eric Cohen, I believe is how you pronounce the name.
Yeah, he was a German soldier who actually left to fight against.
The Axis forces.
Yes.
Yeah, and he actually did survive up until future times. When I say future, the present. He was one of the few who took the infinity formula, which we'll talk about in a second.
Okay, Jerry Larkin, who was killed in issue 63. George Stonewell, also killed. I don't feel like he was one of the main ones.
No, he was not. I mean, there's always going to be the red shirts, and these were kind of the red shirts.
Yeah. The rest of these are pretty much unknown, so I don't even.
Yeah, there were three other. There was Dwayne Wilson, Hans Klaus, and Fred Jones. Fred Jones isn't even mentioned when he died or whatever happened to him. That's how just vanilla he was in the storyline.
I see.
But so again, all in all, of the original, this is the World War II era. Now there were more commandos, and we'll talk about them later on. But of the original commandos, these were the 15. So before we start talking about the commandos, I think it's important we talk about the infinity formula, because the infinity formula plays a big part of why some of the commandos are still around in the 20th century, 21st century.
And how do they look so good?
Why do they look so good? Is it what
They've gotten some really great facials and moisturizers over the years.
So we know there a number of people from the Howling Commandos took the infinity formula. What it really was, it was a formula created by Sir Isaac Newton in 1652. It was called the Forever Compound, and basically it was a compound that granted immortality. Again, that was 1652.
Wow.
The version.
So why isn't Sir Isaac Newton still around?
Because it's too dangerous, Nikki. It's way too dangerous.
He was too smart to take it.
That was basically it. They got the formula and they tried to recreate it, but of course they couldn't create it perfectly. And what they ended up creating was the infinity formula. This formula gives basically it takes people to the top of their abilities, kind of like Captain America. Superhuman is technically the right term, but they use peak human. So gives them peak human strength, endurance, agility, and stamina. And it does halt the aging process significantly. But it's got to be administered regularly, like once a year.
Okay.
And if you don't take it once a year, or if there's no way that it gets kind of revitalized in your system, you immediately start catching up.
Yeah.
So if the older you are, and if you stop taking it, like within days, you will become an old crone, basically.
That's harsh.
We know that obviously Nick Fury Sr. took it, Gabe Jones took it, Eric Cohen took it, Dum Dum Dugan did not. So how does he look so good, and what is the secret of his mustache, Nikki?
We'll have to find
We'll
that
have
out
to
later.
find out in just a moment. So of the three on the card and in the game, Nick Fury Sr. is probably the most well-known of the three. So why don't we talk a little bit about him?
All right, Andy, let's do it.
So he can easily be made into his own lore video. There is
Oh, I
so
think
much
I think
about.
we could have like 3 or 4 videos on
Right.
Nick Fury.
So we decided amongst ourselves that we're just going to narrow it down to some of the most, pertinent key facts that people probably wanted to know.
Yeah, and I think one of the most interesting is the fact that there's speculation that he's based off of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby.
Right. He's an amalgamation. They said if you look at the way he was originally drawn, and then you look at Jack Kirby, he's got a lot of facial features. They both chomp on cigars all the time. But they also mentioned in that same article that Stan Lee had some of the mannerisms and attitude that Nick Fury did as well.
Yeah, some of the expressions that Nick Fury used in the original Commandos comic book, yeah, there was a lot of talk that he is based off of them. And I didn't notice him chomping cigars later. It was just in those first.
That was very much a Hollywood cliche, too, of the sergeant chomping on the cigar, running into battle.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and he was definitely and he was a very cool guy in those Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commando comics. He was definitely a hard ass.
he was no nonsense hard ass.
No nonsense, but he loved his squad, like he loved his guys and he took care of them. And I think that's also something you can see on what they do in the card.
Yeah.
A lot of their powers have to do with working together as a team.
Exactly. And I think that they did a great job of encapsulating that in the rules of the game. So another thing that many people probably wonder is how he lost his eye. That actually happened in Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos issue number 19. As you will see as a reoccurring theme, shrapnel is very dangerous. In this case, a Nazi soldier threw a grenade at him, and the grenade exploded and caught him in the eye, basically, caught him on the side of the face. And according to a couple different sources, he lost 95% of his vision there. So I guess it didn't completely destroy the eye, but the eye was all but useless at that point.
You know what's interesting though, Andy, and I didn't even mention this to you, but when Nick Fury is kind of after S.H.I.E.L.D. and he's out on his own, and it's called like Agent of Nothing is what he calls himself, and he gets the Secret Warriors. It's the Secret Warriors issue.
Mm-hmm.
There's during those issues, the Howling Commandos are having a reunion.
Yeah.
And the guys are talking about how he lost his eye and they're making bets on it and stuff. And Dum Dum says, "Should we tell him how you really lost your eye?" And they kind of joke about it. And it's like, I don't know if the writers forgot or didn't realize, or if that was a mistake, or if there's something we don't know.
Well, I mean, the very front of the issue says the story of how he lost his eye. So I don't know how they probably did forget about that.
I screenshot it, so we'll put it up there now and show you.
Exactly.
But it's I was like, oh well, this is weird. So
right.
Hey, we all make mistakes.
We all mistakes. Mistakes were made. So another big thing about Nick Fury. Nick Fury Sr., Nick Fury Jr., are they related? The answer is yes. Nick Fury Jr. is, for the most part, the love child of Nick Fury and a CIA agent named Nia Johnson.
Yeah, and basically, it was a, I don't know, bump in the night type of situation.
Well, okay, so he explains the whole story, which if you were you have to read the issue because we don't want to go too much into this now. We'll probably talk about it more if we get into the Nick Fury Jr. video. But basically, he was explaining they were on a mission, and it was a successful mission, and of course, they both faced death, and they're like, we survived the night, let's just have passion through the night. And then she left him. She's like, okay, that was like, fun.
Bye.
It's usually in those kind of things the guys leave. No, she did. And he kind of made the comment, she didn't really want a whole lot to do with him after that. It was just a one-night fling, but she got pregnant. He found out about it because He's a creepy stalker kind of guy.
He's Nick Fury.
He's Nick
He knows
Fury,
everything.
and that's kind of it. He knows everything. And when she found out that she was pregnant, she basically gave up her CIA life, which they made it very clear she was very good at her job. She had a bright future, but she gave it up for at that. Even though he was technically named Nicholas Fury Jr., he went by the name of Marcus Johnson up until he found out his full past. And again, we're going to stop it at that because
there's just too much. There's too much.
It is a fantastic story, and if you want to know more about that in a future lore video, let us know. So the final thing, and this is kind of the theme we're going with all the people. What is their ultimate fate? That's that's a video into itself. We'll keep it at Nick Fury Sr. is alive. And he is no longer working for himself, but he's working for a being on the cosmic level. And that's all we'll probably need to say, or should say at this point, because again, to explain why is another major story.
There's just Nick Fury, I mean, he's been in the comics for so long. There's way too much. And we're kind of focused more on his time with the Howling Commandos.
That's anyway. It, yeah. So.
But he does stay in touch with the Howling Commandos, especially Dum Dum, which maybe we should talk about him next.
Let's talk about him next. Timothy Aloysius called Walder Tim Dugan, a.k.a. Dum Dum Dugan. That is one hell of a name and a magnificent mustache, Nikki.
That is a magnificent mustache. I mean, that's like right up there with Sam Elliott.
It is. They could go and fight wars on their own. Those not the people, their mustaches.
So yeah, one interesting thing about Dum Dum is he before World War II was a circus performer. He was a strongman.
Strongman.
Born in Boston, Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
Irish.
And the strongman comes into play a little bit later on. I don't know if you caught this. When we get there, I'll see if you remember seeing this in the comic. But yeah, he was a strongman. He joined the Commandos and basically became Nick Fury's right-hand man and best friend.
Yeah, they were really, in those first few issues especially, really funny together, insulted each other, but really loved each other.
Right, so Nick Fury was an E5 sergeant. Dum Dum Dugan was an E4 corporal. So they were both non-commissioned officers. But Nick Fury obviously outranked Dugan. That never stopped them. Never stopped him from just giving him all kinds of hell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then Dum Dum, after World War II, he goes on. He's in the Korean War. He's in the Vietnam War. And then he becomes a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. And I think pretty high ranking.
Yes, he got pretty... And that's how I always saw him. He was a member of S.H.I.E.L.D. And he had lots of great adventures with S.H.I.E.L.D., including hunting Godzilla at one point.
Oh, my.
So,
and then I think he also, I believe he was the leader of the weird...
he did a lot of... Okay, yeah. We're going to talk about them a little bit more. But yeah, the weird commandos. And
that were monsters.
Right, the Howling Commandos. And we'll talk a little bit about them in a bit. And the Ducky Dozen.
Oh my goodness.
In the Howard the Duck series.
Yeah, that was crazy.
However, there is something that's rather tragic about Dum Dum. So if you look at him in the comics, and he is in the 21st century, he's very much front forward in a lot of the comics. He never took the Infinity Formula. So how does he look so damn good, Nikki?
Well, I think he would have died at some point. But it was more of a modern story, but they went back and said, this is what happened.
Right.
Basically, he would have died. Nick Fury couldn't handle it. I mean, this was his best friend.
And this was right after World War II. So this, I believe, well, okay, I read two conflicting things. One that said it happened in the 50s, one that said it happened in the 70s. But he ended up getting, they were on a two-man mission, him and Nick Fury, and a ricochet shot bounced off a wall and killed Dugan, Well, mortally wounded him.
Mortally wounded him. They Nick Fury had his body basically put into like a stasis, and he had his a robot, an LMD.
This was a new kind of LMD, even for the time, a new kind of LMD using alien technology.
Yeah. So he had his consciousness basically beamed into the LMD, and then he had extras just in case something else happened, which other things did happen. Dum Dum never knew. Never knew until I think just a few years ago,
Right.
and was very upset, which, yeah, I would be too.
And do you know what the project was called?
No.
Strongman.
Oh, that's
So,
so sad. But once Dum Dum realized that he wasn't just a second-rate Dugan, it was actually his original consciousness
mhm.
in the LMD. He kind of was like, you know what, I'm okay with this.
Right. So, yeah, his consciousness does exist, and it got transferred from body to body. Well, because he mentioned in the comics, Dugan died a number of times over the years. So it wasn't just that one time. He would have died multiple times, but Nick Fury kept on bringing him back because he couldn't bear to see his best friend die.
So with that, why don't we talk about Gabe Jones?
Gabe Jones. Gabe Jones is a very interesting character, especially from the early days of the Howling Commandos.
Yeah, so, besides being one of the first African American characters in a comic book, one of the first, um, in the comics, he was a jazz musician from New Orleans. When he joined the army and was in World War II with the Howling Commandos, the chief thing that he did was play the trumpet, like in battle.
He would play, I mean, you'll see on the screen right now, during a lot of the major battles, including a lot of battles where people died, you see him front and forward playing his trumpet.
And apparently he played it so loud it would actually just the enemies would be like, oh my gosh, my ears. So
To the point where they actually had to create an arch nemesis for him from the Nazis.
that played a flute.
I mean, could you think of anything more epic? A trumpeter versus an evil Nazi flutist.
I'm sorry, but the trumpet's gonna win. It's gonna win.
Yeah,
That evil flutist, I just don't know what.
Or the flautist, I don't know. Yeah, this was the Blitzkrieg Squad, which was the antithesis of the Howling Commandos. And they had a special member dedicated to eradicating Gabe, and he was Otto, the flutist.
They also had other people on the German side that were like was supposed to be like the other characters in the Commandos.
Right.
So they were so afraid of the Commandos that they had to have their own German squad.
Right. And they fought a number of times. And, of course, the Howling Commandos defeated them handily. So, what else about Gabe Jones?
Well, Gabe Jones, he also was in the Korean War and the Vietnam War, also became a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. But here's something you might not know, Andy. There is a little something something going on with Peggy Carter.
What?
Yes, it's true.
My Peggy, Steve's Peggy Carter.
Andy has a ship. It's his only ship ever, and it's Steve and Peggy. But
it's the only ship
Steve
ever.
and Peggy weren't really as much of an item in the comics.
Right.
I mean, they were, but not like him and Sharon. Sharon Carter and Steve were more of an item in the comics.
Exactly. Yes. And Peggy, as you mentioned, Peggy Carter, also known as Agent 13, had a very rough past. And when they ended up meeting each other, which was in the 70s.
I believe, yeah, they were like in their 40s, and they formed a friendship. And it definitely, there was something there. They didn't go into great detail about it, but there was definitely a romance brewing.
Right. But they would eventually go on their own separate ways. I believe he married somebody else further down the line, and as you stated, he left the military, came back, joined S.H.I.E.L.D. He also hunted Godzilla with Dum Dum Dugan.
That's awesome.
And he was part of S.H.I.E.L.D. during the Dark Reign, when if you watch the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. show, you remember, of course, they brought up the fact that Hydra had infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yeah. That was kind of the time when they're talking about the Secret Warriors, and they kind of were having a bit of a reunion with the Howling Commandos. They came out to help Nick, and unfortunately, he met his end in one of those issues.
And I want to talk real quick about that issue too. That if you've ever been to a military funeral, or done a military roll call when there are people who are deceased, that's hard. And that's basically what this was. It was remembering the dead, remembering their old people. This is where you found out Percival had died along the way. He had died off screen, if you will. So that was kind of a hard comic to read. And right after they kind of, it was Gabe and Eric Colleen had kind of toasted the dead. Within the next couple of pages, they both died.
Yeah,
Eric was shot in the head, and then Gabe was decapitated by Gorgon. That was kind of a hard issue to read for me.
it was
It
hard.
was
Yeah,
emotional. So,
yeah,
and that sucks. So at this point, they are both still dead. Even after the Battle World had kind of, or War World had kind of redone the timeline, to my knowledge, they're both still dead from what we saw. So, but he fought until the end. He was a true Howling Commando to the very end.
yeah.
So the Howling Commandos had a couple of interesting team ups over the years and a couple of very interesting iterations of the teams. Let's talk about some of the people who they actually fought alongside.
Okay, well, the first team up they had was issue 13, and that was Captain America and Bucky. And I guess the fans of the comic had been writing and writing and writing in to the comic and saying, "Hey, we want to see this." And so, and I think this was the last issue that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did together of the Howling Commandos. But Captain America and Bucky joined them.
It was also unlucky issue 13, and
Yes,
that was part of the reason why they wanted to make sure that it was,
it
knocked out of
was
the
a good
park.
one. It was
So,
a good one, and I think it really is a good issue to read if you want to go back and read even one of them.
right. Agreed. They've also teamed up various members, I should say, Black Panther,
Hmm.
Gabe Jones specifically, and after that team up, he actually was made a citizen of Wakanda.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Later on, later iterations of the Howling Commandos actually teamed up with the Punisher. They were hunting him, but of course, this being the Punisher comic, they didn't defeat him, and they ended up all working towards the same goal in the very end.
Yeah.
So this is, as we stated, the World War II version of the Howling Commandos. There were some other very interesting versions of the Howling Commandos, or people who took the name. So we'll call the classic ones the World War II Commandos. The second iteration was called Nick Fury's Howling Commandos, and they were quite literally monsters. This included Clay Quarterman, who was, I think, the only human on the team, Warwolf, Nina Prince, the Vampire by Night, uh, Nikatu, the Living Mummy, I think it's how you pronounce that name, Frankenstein, Gorilla Man, and John Doe, who was a zombie.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
so they were trying to go off the howling aspect of that of the
I'm
Howling
gonna
Commandos
take a
there.
wild guess and say this probably didn't last long.
It did not last very long at all. That was in 2005. The next iteration you kind of touched on was the Secret Invasion Howling Commandos. Or these were more of the Secret Warriors, but they also went by the Howling Commandos at one point.
Well, yeah, they were kind of a group of kids really, and it was led by Quake, Daisy Johnson.
Mhm.
Um, One of the things, like, and the original Howling Commandos did show up during this time period as well. We talked about it briefly when, that's when Gabe died. Um, but one of the things that really stuck out to me during these issues was just how much of a hard ass Nick Fury is. There was this one issue, and we'll put a picture up right now. Daisy Johnson and one of the team members, the young team members, I think his name was Hellfire.
Hellfire.
They kind of had a romance going on. Unfortunately, Hellfire was also working for Hydra. But he kind of regretted it. He fell in love with Daisy, and Nick Fury found out about it. During one of the battles, JT Hellfire starts to fall off a cliff. Nick Fury kind of grabs his hand and he's like, "Hey, I knew what you were doing the whole time." And he's like, "Oh, I regretted it, and I love Daisy." And he's like, "Yeah, I think you do love Daisy. And if Daisy were here, she'd probably want me to save you, but Daisy's not here." And he lets go of his hand. And I was like, "What?" Like, man, he is tough. So
no quarter given. That's fantastic.
And he thought of Daisy as like his daughter. So, I probably would have done the same thing for my daughter.
So, as I say, this is the Secret Invasion era, which is when the Skrulls were taking over. After that, you had Dark Reign, which is when the Skrulls were defeated by Norman Osborn, supposedly. There's way more to that story than meets the eye. But there were a couple different versions during this time. It was basically S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who refused to join Hammer. There was a long storyline as to why S.H.I.E.L.D. was being disbanded into Hammer. But these 1,200 S.H.I.E.L.D. agents refused to join Hammer, which was the organization Norman Osborn ran. And Dum Dum Dugan and Gabe Jones actually took charge of them, and they were Howling Commandos during Dark Reign.
Heck yeah, they did.
Later on, you'd have the Black Ops version, which is the one that went after the Punisher. And then we'd have Phil Coulson's Howling Commandos. This was another kind of monster version whose goal was to combat Dormammu and his mindless plague. And the last and most recent version of the Howling Commandos is yet a third version of monsters.
Oh my gosh. They can't let it go, Andy. They can't let it go.
And this is under the command of Stake, Stake, who were in the all-new, all-different Marvel era, led by the LMD of Dum Dum Dugan. This is, again, a lot of the same monsters. We're not going into them. But it included Hitmonkey, which is a fan favorite, believe it or not. So the Howling Commandos are alive and well in certain iterations to this day. They certainly get around.
I really would like to just, focus on the World War II. I think that was the best.
Let's just go back there. So that is quite a bit about the Howling Commandos.
Do you like them better now? Are you more interested?
I am deeply impressed. This is, again, why I love reading the lore, because now I'm excited when they're on the table. And I would probably have too much hesitancy to put them out into danger. It's like, don't hurt the Commandos. These are war veterans, Nikki.
Well, Andy, as long as you say wahoo, they'll be okay.
No, I think they're very fascinating. I really did enjoy the research on this one. They've got a very rich history, a very diverse history, and again, I salute Stan Lee and Jack Kirby for some of the decisions they made. But beyond that, they've always had a rather interesting story. This was not a cliched, root and toot 'em, the U.S. American soldiers are going to come save the day. There were very real consequences to what happened in the comics for them.
There were. Sometimes it was like that, but
it was fun. Yeah, I mean, there were some very stereotypes.
But also, you're right. It wasn't just that. It was very diverse. There was, one of the Nick Fury's first love interests. I think her name was Pamela, and she was a British lady. She was, I want to say her name was Lady Pamela.
MI6, MI5, probably.
And it was a really sweet story because she was all classy and he was all rough and everything. And she died.
Yeah.
She died during that time. And the next issue after that was called An Eye for an Eye because Nick Fury was after revenge.
Right.
So these were cool stories.
These were really
neat. And it was more than just a war story. There was depth to it.
Right. And again, you can find a lot of these in the Marvel Unlimited app. It's a subscription service, but you basically have access to a lot of these old ones. And no, this is not paid. This
No,
is
no,
just
we're not advertising.
this is not us advertising.
This is just us telling you this is how you can get your hands on a lot of these old comics. I cannot even tell you. I have never been a comic book reader. I have read so many comics lately, and it's really fun. I just put it up on the iPad, and
Mhm.
away you go.
And
So,
away you go. So that was again a look at the Howling Commandos. We hope you enjoyed this lore. If you've got any other suggestions on who you'd like to see next, please let us know in the comments. And until next time,
bye.
bye bye.